Great. So welcome, everyone. I'm Ross Yelsey. I work here in the Office of Admission and Financial Aid here at Columbia Journalism School. Nice to have you all tuning in today to learn more about our Master of Science Stabile Investigative Specialization. This is a great time to have a conversation about all of our programs because right now our deadline for all applications will be December 15th. So anyone who's interested in the Stabile program or any of the other opportunities here, you'll have at least 2 months, if not a bit more time, to put together an application, learn from all of our faculty and alumni, hear from our team in the admissions office, and make sure you can put together a strong application. And this is a great time of year just to learn more about, exactly what each program offers, kind of the kind of training, the type of opportunities you'll get, and to just be very informed as you put together an application. So thanks again for joining us to learn more about this particular investigative specialization, which has been a real cornerstone of the school for many years now. And also just to reiterate, for the application, there is no fee this year, so people are welcome to apply to journalism school, and there will be no monetary fee to submit your application. We're really happy about that. And we hope you'll join us for any other upcoming sessions. We'll be having many more about the ins and outs of the application process and our other degree programs as well. So please just continue to converse with us, come to our sessions throughout the fall. We'll be happy to see you at many more of these over the next couple months. But today, talking about the Stabile Investigative Specialization, I'm really happy to have Professor Sheila Coronel, who's the director of the Stabile Investigative Program here at the school, Professor Ese Olumhense, who's also a faculty member and an alum of the program, and Leo Bevilacqua, who just graduated last year from the Stabile program and can talk more from a recent student's perspective on what it's like to do this particular specialization within the school. But I thought I'd start with Sheila and Essay. Could you tell us a little bit about your own backgrounds in journalism and also in education?
Hi, everyone. I'm the director of the Stabile Center for Investigative Journalism, which is in charge of the Stabile program. I came to Columbia in 2006 to start the Stabile program, so it's about 20 years old now. But before that, I was a journalist in the Philippines. I started out as a journalist during the waning years of the Marcos dictatorship, when the press was free, and so there was a lot of censorship, lots of threats of arrests and interrogations. I actually started out in my college paper, as I'm sure some of you did. We did a survey of our class this year, and I think many of them, it's a typical Stabile is somebody who's worked for the college paper. So I did that. But I also worked for an underground newspaper during the dictatorship, doing newsletters that were clandestinely distributed, and publishing material that was not allowed in the controlled press at that time. I set up a nonprofit investigative reporting center in the Philippines, and I was director of that for many years before I came to Columbia. Our work has spanned, the whole gamut of everything from, when we were transitioning from dictatorship to democracy. So a lot of it was really about democratic institutions, including the newly formed legislature, holding the executive to account, holding the military, which was very powerful during the dictatorship, and in fact tried to unseat democratic governments. So investigating the army, the military, the armed forces, and also looking at not emerging, but long simmering social issues that the press didn't pay much attention to, such as, the environment, um, gender equality. The Philippines is a very Catholic country, so issues like reproductive rights and women's health were relatively new issues that popped up when the press was free. So I've been director of the program, and I've been managed, and I was academic dean also for a while. And during my time as academic dean, we made investigative techniques, a 7-week class that's mandatory for all students, regardless of their concentration, whether they're MS or MA. So everybody now gets a dose of investigative journalism, whether they like it or not. But the investigative program, Stabile program, is a concentrated dose of it. It's a mega dose of investigative reporting throughout the year that you are here.
And Essay, how about you?
Hi, everyone. Good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are. My name is Ese Olumhense. I'm an adjunct assistant professor. I work with Sheila, co-teaching the Stabile program. Like Ross mentioned, I was also an alum of the program. I actually went to the journalism school 10 years ago, so it feels like a very long time. And since leaving school, I've lived lots of lives in journalism, specifically in investigative reporting. I worked at the Chicago Tribune, the City, Spotlight PA, the Center for Investigative Reporting, Reveal, doing lots of different things, covering lots of different beats. In addition to teaching at the journalism school in the Stabile program, I'm also a School of the New York Times teacher.
Pretty cool. And Sheila, I love that word you used a minute ago, mega dose of investigative journalism. Why did it
Yes.
seem to be a good idea to have a program within our school that really provides students a mega dose if they're looking for that, as opposed to the broader MS curriculum, which has, as you noted, investigative training as a part of it? But why have a program that really gives people this real intensive training? What's the advantage of going through this program if you're interested in investigative work?
Well, if you're interested in investigative work, there's really a lot to learn. The 7 week class that's mandatory for all the students is really just, in the tip of the iceberg in terms of investigative skills. It looks mostly at the use of public records for reporting. But investigative reporting is more than just following the document trail. It's also about, interviewing, developing sources, learning how to think on your feet, dealing with difficult situations, conceptualizing an investigation, formulating an investigative hypothesis, finding proof and evidence of wrongdoing. And that takes time. And what we do a lot in our class is really workshop student projects. So your main yeah, one of the requirements of the program is the production of a master's project, which is an investigative report. So a lot of our time is devoted to helping you do an ambitious investigative report that hopefully can get published, as Leo's project was. And that really means finding evidence of wrongdoing, finding new and revelatory information, meaning people didn't know about this in the past, putting that together in a compelling story and making sure that your facts are right and that you can stand legal scrutiny, threats of libel or whatever, and making sure you get all sides in the story. So that takes time, and we walk you through that process. So it really takes a year to learn all of that.
Great. I say, what drew you to Stabile when you were a student yourself? What was the kind of appeal of doing investigative deep dive work?
Yeah, frankly, Sheila, before I came to the journalism school, I worked at a place called Sahara Reporters. They did work on sub-Saharan Africa related to democracy, human rights, etc. And my boss at the time knew Sheila, and people talked about her with such esteem. I will spare you all the fawning, but the understanding that you could work on a project over the course of a year. So all of the assignments, all of the workshops, all of the discussion in the class kind of scaffolds, it builds toward the eventual master's project. I wanted to come away from journalism school with a piece of work that I could be proud of, that could be published, that would stand up to the kind of scrutiny that Sheila mentioned. And I got that experience from the programs. So I think talking to other people who either knew Sheila or had been through the Stabile program and had positive experiences, they left school with those coveted skills and with really strong work was a real draw for me.
Great. And Leo, I know we were just talking before the session started that it's just a year ago you were in the program doing all of this work. Can you take us back to what you were doing before you came to the journalism school and how the MS investigative specialization seemed like the right fit for what you wanted to do at that point?
Yeah, no, I was working at a news magazine that did mostly feature writing, and that was mostly what I was doing. Um, I was doing a lot of I had written a cover story. I did one story that could be called investigative. I talked to like a dozen data laborers for Google subcontractors, teaching the AI chatbots how to speak humanely. And doing that job, I realized that the outlet I was working for couldn't really support the type of work that I was finding that I really enjoyed doing. I had been a teacher in Mississippi for a few years prior to that. And, you know, as a teacher, I had noted about a number of issues that I just wanted to look into as a journalist. And, you know, I had family back there and I had been going back and forth over the holidays. And I realized that with this program, I would have the opportunity to really work on something ambitious about people that, you know, former neighbors, people that are in my family. And it, you know, that's mainly why I applied, was to, you know, develop the technical skills to pursue the type of ambitious work that I really felt passionately about doing. And I'm in Mississippi now. I'm working for Mississippi Today and doing a lot of that really ambitious investigative work. And I could not have done that without this program. You know, I think a lot of it was just giving me the confidence to do it and the skills.
Great, thanks. And I think just to give people watching a little bit of a kind of a tangible sense of what the program looks like, I'll share my screen in a minute and we'll look at kind of the 2 semester breakdown of the Stabile curriculum. And maybe Sheila, Ese, and Leo, we can talk a bit about some of how it operates. So maybe not in every detail, because I realized I did a webinar the other day and we could probably talk for hours about every component, every block of the curriculum, but maybe we'll talk in broader strokes about kind of how you build the skills in the fall and then take classes in the spring to kind of build off of the essentials that you've already kind of learned in that first block of the year. So I'll share my screen here. Oh, there's a thing popping up, of course. Great, 1 second. So maybe I'll start with Sheila. Could we just talk a little bit, maybe in broader strokes, about it's kind of how this curriculum is designed and kind of what you kind of learn in the fall, and then how you apply that to what you'll do in the spring.
So this is the Stabile curriculum is intersects with the general curriculum of the MS program. And so all the students take a reporting class that begins in middle of August. And it is really a crash course in reporting. You choose a beat, you walk the streets of New York, you produce stories. So you get the basic skills of doing news and feature stories, explanatory stories during this 9-week class. We start with the Stabile Investigative Techniques in September, as you'll see at the bottom of that thing, at the same time that you're getting ready with doing the bulk of your reporting. And this is really to get you started on basic investigative techniques, introduced to the concept of investigative reporting, what makes it different from other types of reporting, what is the investigative process, how you look at how you find public records to bolster your reporting, how you interview, spend a lot of time doing interviewing, how you develop an investigative hypothesis, getting you ready really for your reporting on your master's projects, which starts, it basically starts right now. We're assigning our master's project advisors right now. The master's project, as you see at the bottom of this graphic, it starts around October and ends at around March. So that's when you start conceptualizing, thinking about what is the story you want to do, how you'll find evidence of wrongdoing. We're very much focused on finding evidence of wrongdoing. And then you do your reporting during the Christmas break for the master's projects, which is not a Christmas break, but a winter break, which is about mid-December to mid-January. So you have about a month to do field reporting. So like Leo went to Mississippi, drove around Mississippi, hundreds of miles in Mississippi to do his master's project. Maybe Leo, you can talk about that, but that is done during the winter break. At the same time, let's finish the fall first, which is on the left side of this screen, is you do the other courses, which are written word in the second half, which is mainly writing. Image and sound, you have a selection of, you can choose between audio, video, or data. Then you take law and ethics, which everybody does. These are the bigger classes. And the journalism now is really just a series of lectures. There's no coursework there. A lot of it is just talking about how journalism is changing, bringing, speakers from from all around New York, from all around the world, really, to talk about journalism as currently practiced. It's more like an enrichment series. In the second half of the year, which is the spring semester, we have you have a choice of a 15-week seminar and production class. And you can choose anything from, we have about 20 plus, 25, sometimes 30 classes to choose from. And they can range from um, um, audio classes to video classes to classes that are based on certain topics like the environment, immigration, etc., to classes that are much more, in a way, I don't know if we still have the journalist as history class, but, classes that are, we have the journalism of ideas, it's really, there's cultural reporting, there's a whole range. And you can choose anything among that. There's a lot of narrative classes to choose from. There's a lot of data and computational classes to choose from as well. But all students have 2 seminar and production classes. All Stabile students are required to take an investigative seminar and production class. And you can choose from investigating healthcare to investigating conflict, where you learn open source investigative techniques, to investigating across borders using data. So this is for those who are interested in doing international cross-border reporting. We also have a podcast, an investigative podcast that you can take. So students then choose among these classes whatever they want. There's choices that are there. But the bottom half of this is everything, journalism, history, and business of journalism. That's mandatory for all students. There's just once a week. And then we continue with the Stabile program, the investigative seminar, which basically is a workshop of your master's project. So every student gets to present, and the class critiques your stories. But at the same time, we bring in other speakers, but it also talk about the changing landscape of investigative reporting and how you'll find your place in that landscape. We talk about fact checking. We talked about doing a libel review. We talk about pitching the story. So in the course of the whole Stabile program, from the investigative techniques to investigative seminar, we do the arc of the process of producing an investigative project. Everything from conceptualization to fact checking and doing a libel check and pitching your story.
Mm-hmm. Great. And Sheila and Ese, maybe just a couple examples of what recently has been maybe the subject of some of the Stabile Wednesday night sessions. I know those go on every Wednesday for the group. Anything that's been going on the last few weeks, just to give people a sense of what you've been talking about.
Yeah, so last night we talked about the Freedom of Information Act and public records law, how you can use these laws at the state, local, federal, international level to access information. So we get really specific in terms of techniques and best practices and things that work for filing requests. I mentioned the way that the program kind of you build towards the project. So the assignment would be writing a public records request that you could use to further report your story. We also did interviewing. We did an assessment of some of the early and exploratory interviews that folks are doing for their master's projects. We talk about what works, what doesn't work. It's one of those opportunities where the experience of your peers is very instructive. Some people have great interviews, as Leo and other folks might know. Sometimes you don't have a great interview. And I think all of those experiences are instructive. We've also talked in recent weeks about desktop research. This is the suite of techniques that you can use from wherever you are to access information that's out there on the internet. What's in the archives? What's in the existing record? What's in the clips? Like what's out there that you can see and touch and use to help construct an investigative hypothesis? We've also dug deep into a foundational kind of understanding of investigative reporting. So what is an investigative story? If you're sitting on this call and you don't know what that is, if you come to the program, I promise that you'll learn specifically what an investigative story is composed of, the different elements, the different parts of the process.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. I'm going to get rid of that visualization. Don't worry if you didn't write it all down. You can go to the Stabile page on our website, and in the curriculum area, that visualization is there. So no worries about trying to memorize it during the session. But moving to Leo, Leo, maybe you can tell us a bit about some of your highlights over those 2 semesters. Any classes, projects that really stand out? I remember some of the classes you take since you took that you took since it was just been a year. But can you tell us a bit about some of the things you learned in your time here?
Yeah, I took the Shoe Leather class, which is the narrative investigative podcast, and ours was on Giuliani. And I found his secretary for like a bulk of his early career in a nursing home in Virginia. And we like showed up at her door with audio equipment, and she just like talked about what he was like kind of as a young person with ambition. And that episode was really incredible because going into it, honest, if I'm going to be honest, I was like, I don't know, like Julie, like whenever you're told as a reporter to report on something, there's always like a little bit of pushback, especially like, if your editor is feeding you stories, you're just like, I don't know, but it was really interesting to learn new things about someone who is very much a public figure, and to talk to people from his deep into his past. And we interviewed a lot of people who worked from him early on. We got some records back from the National Archives from when he was working for Reagan, which I had no idea about previously. He actually is responsible for the modern immigration detention system. And we found all of these letters that he wrote from the AG's office in DC, basically coordinating with the Bureau of Prisons these detention camps for Haitian refugees. And to see the birth of detention now that what we're seeing in the news was just very interesting. And that's Shoe Leather is the name of the class, and it was just again to do it in audio was new to me. And I would say also in the Stabile class, just developing the thesis from the early stages. I spoke to a lot of funeral home directors, and at the beginning, I thought that the story would be more geared around funeral homes. And I still, in my newsroom, I'm the one who like is obsessed with the death care industry, and people, people at first were like, "That's kind of weird," but funeral home directors have an interesting insight into the criminal justice system. And I know Sheila also interviewed a lot of funeral home directors for her own investigative stories. They just keep records of, deaths and details about homicides and other cases that you might not think to ask. And it just interested me to know the role that a lot of these, officials played in their communities. So I would say between my thesis and Shoe Leather, and I also worked on a book proposal that kind of dovetailed with my thesis about the history of funeral homes. Was able to publish something recently, kind of using some of that material. Was just really interesting to me. I think that if you are really interested and curious about the world, you'll find that you never get bored, and that you always have, you're always engaged. Because as a reporter, you have an editor, you have a boss, but you're really your own driver of, what you produce. So I would say that the podcast and the thesis were really a highlight for me.
Mhm. And speaking of the master's project, the investigative project, Leo did funeral homes, but for Sheila and Ese, can you give people a sense of just kind of the range of what you could potentially investigate in this program? I know people have interest they might be coming in with, whether it's, domestic issues, international issues related to sports or education, but what are some examples of what people might be able to put together while they're here?
Leo, would you like to put a link to your published project on the chat? Yeah. Ese, maybe you can talk about your master's project and how you got that published and so on, and the other projects of your classmates, maybe.
Yeah, so my master's project was on the New York City Housing Authority. It's the largest public housing authority in the United States. And they had a program that existed for decades that would help crime victims and crime witnesses who applied to be relocated to safer housing. And what I found, through document research and interviews with sources, was that this program really didn't function in the way that it was supposed to. So people would really languish in locations that were provably unsafe for them. The agency also had this rule that you had to be attacked twice and illustrate the connection between the attacks within a period of time. I think it was 6 months or a year. And that was hard for a lot of people to do, right? You were asking people to either wait to be attacked again or after being attacked twice, document the relationship or try to illustrate and show this relationship between the attacks to the agency. So that seed story, I would say, was really what kind of kicked off my investigative career. One, I knew I had the skills to be able to pull together a hypothesis and then have findings and then present that in a compelling way. But I really feel like that story got the attention of the editors and the reporters and the people I had admired and looked up to. I also think what's really cool, and this is an aside about investigative journalism, is like you could go to law school for 3 years, you could graduate, study for, and take the bar, and you probably won't, I won't say probably won't, but you could get impact, in a similar way as an investigative reporter, right? Like we are lay people who agitate and change systems. And I think that's really amazing. And some of my classmates, the year I was in the Stabile program, they covered kleptocracy. There was a class project on kleptocracy. Students have covered things like the housing court, translation, special education, conviction integrity units, laws that exist for people who are sex offenders, children who are accused of sexual offenses. I mean, there's a very wide range. People are material witnesses. They've been smuggled into the US. Someone did a really great story on people who remain in the country as part of these proceedings, but they're not really under arrest for anything, right? They are actually the victims of smuggling. So there is a fascinating, and Sheila, I'm sure I'm forgetting some really great, and Leo, some really great projects, but there is a real range of things. And you could think about, the US as kind of like your playground or your sandbox to do your reporting over the winter break.
Mhm.
So yeah, not all our stories are political in nature or criminal justice or stuff like that. So one of our students did a report on maternal mental health, the mental health of new mothers, and looked at suicide, and she had cases of mothers who committed suicide because mental health doctors didn't pay very much attention to mental health issues after women give birth. And that came out on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, and it became a podcast as well. So we do issues that are more like social or environmental. We have a student this year who's looking at the power consumption of data centers that are used to power artificial intelligence machines, and the impact of that on the environment. We've looked at heat, the impact of unprecedented high levels of heat on workers who do not have heat protections. And very often, labor unions and employers do not pay attention to problems of heat. We've looked at legislation related to heat, and one of the stories that one of our students did was about how in Florida, the state legislature approved a law that would give protection to student athletes, thanks to a mother whose son died and campaigned and lobbied the state legislature to demand that schools make sure that there are provisions for student athletes when they go out to the playing field. At the same time, the Florida legislature refused to approve a law that would provide protections to farm workers and outdoor workers, so showing the inequity in the legislation. Student athletes get protection, but farm workers and outdoor construction workers do not in Florida. So we look at issues of social justice as well, social inequities and just about anything. I mean, our students have a talent for discovering very interesting. So one of them I remember because one of our students is now working in thinking of looking at a sports stadium and the corruption behind it in upstate New York. One of them looked at the Yankee Stadium. And when the Yankee Stadium was built, there was a provision that part of the proceeds would go to nonprofits. And he looked at which nonprofits were getting those proceeds from the Yankee Stadium, this big famous baseball stadium. And he saw that there were a lot of anomalies. There was a lot of politics in who was getting, and that that's now that they've changed the rules about providing support for nonprofits as a result of that expose. I mean, one of our students even did something on the small kart racing, the unsafe racetracks, small tracks, and the number of people who are dying from this unsafe and unregulated racetracks. So it can really run the gamut anywhere from sports to national politics to even international issues.
Yeah, it's a fascinating range of things people can do. I thought maybe I'll ask Sheila, Ese, and Leo also, just kind of what is the quality of the advising? What's that like once you have these ideas that you're coming up with as a student? What's the relationship going to be like with your advisor as you work through this story throughout these months while you're here? Do you get a lot of, one-on-one feedback, edits? What's that process look like?
So the advisor meets with the students regularly. It can be once a week, it can be once every other week. It depends on the rhythm of the advisor and the student. And the advisor helps from everything from the conceptualization to the execution of the project. So the advisor is an investigative journalist. We have a lot of them in New York, and we're lucky to be in New York because we can get people from the New York Times, from ProPublica, the Marshall Project to advise our students. Yeah. So it's a one-on-one relationship. And sometimes the advisor also helps get your stories published.
Yeah, Ese as a once an advisee and an advisor, what's that experience like?
Yeah, I feel, as Sheila mentioned, I feel like we are really lucky. I think the Stabile group has some of the best advising at the journalism school. You are working with an experienced journalist. In some cases, they are an alum of the program. So you have someone, or you're working with someone they understand what you're going through, or understand what you've been through. And I think that's a really rewarding experience. My master's project advisor still works at the journalism school and is someone I'm still in touch with, right? Like, you are cultivating a relationship with someone as well. And I think that that's really valuable.
Yeah, and Leo, you told us about your story, but what was it like kind of working with somebody on that while you were here?
Yeah, I mean, I knew I was interested in criminal justice coming in, and I currently do that a lot. So it was great to be working with someone who specializes in that. A lot of the early questions are, who should I be reaching out to? Who are the kinds of people that you reached out to when you did similar work? What records should I be paying attention to? You're not going to know every form at every agency in the country. And, even to this day, I'm learning about new forms to request and new types of documents to look out for. So it just helps to have someone who has done that work to point you in the right direction and give you advice on how something reads. A lot of later on, they give you kind of structural edits and edits about, what kind of anecdotes to include. For me, I was interviewing a lot of victims of pretty horrific crimes. And it was just helpful to have someone say, this anecdote, maybe we shouldn't use that one. Maybe we should use this one. I mean, it is very sensitive work, and it just helps to have someone there to bounce ideas off of and give you advice on how to structure it towards the end, and even during it. If you hit a wall and you just don't know where to turn next, what different side of an issue to approach, it can be really helpful to have someone
Mhm.
to provide anecdotes and again point you in the right direction.
And also to troubleshoot, if I could add something, right? Like sometimes things don't go well, or you're on a reporting trip, or you have a difficult call. I think the advisor advisee relationship works well also when you can go to that person, or when you know and you can avail yourself of that person and ask those questions. Because again, they are an experienced investigative reporter or editor. So most of the challenges, the hurdles, the roadblocks aren't new to them.
Great. And Leo, since you just graduated last May, maybe I'll ask you first, just to kind of describe what the student community is like within the Stabile program. As we talk about these classes, the skills, these experiences doing the reporting, but what's it like to be a member of this kind of group within the school?
Yeah, it's very tight knit. You really get to know the other people in the program. My year was, I think, 19 students, so not that big. You spend a lot of time with them. You tend to, you know, hang out after class too, and just see them generally a lot more than the other students in the school. So it is a tight knit community. It's a community of people who are, I would say, very geeky and curious. Not in like a negative way, but these are people. You're meeting people who just aren't have nerdy interests. About, for example, I mean, all of our ideas came from like just weird things that don't really interest most other people, but interest us quite a bit, about the criminal justice system or another system. I found a lot of my classmates to be really curious, warm, intelligent people who are very willing to help out if you need it. And are very ambitious, I will say. You have to be to do this work. You have to be ambitious, you have to be relentless in terms of just getting at the proof you need, because it's not going to come easily. You really do need to try. You need to throw a lot of things at the wall, and try a lot of different strategies and talk to a lot of people and cold call a lot of people who might not want to talk to you, and try to get them to warm up. I mean, it's a lot of work. It can be stressful. And it certainly, there were a lot of conversations amongst us about supporting one another, just, mental health wise. People tend to understand, that it can be difficult. Um, I would say that at the end of the day, most of us keep in touch still to this day. Once a week, we talk about like a longer piece of journalism that just interests us, or like a longer magazine piece. And that's one way that we stay in touch. But it's a broad community. I mean, I work with two former Stabiles at the newsroom I'm at right now. And it's just incredible to have that network. And, I went to IRE this year in New Orleans, and you meet other people in the program or people who've heard of the program. And it's a really incredible thing. Even beyond Stabile, like the network of investigative journalists across the country. It's really tight knit and it's supportive, and especially regionally, where I am right now, it's pretty tight knit as well. So in and outside of Stabile, you will get support if you ask for it. If you don't be afraid to not know what you're doing and ask for help, because that's, like, I would say, the biggest regret of mine sometimes is not, you know, swallowing your pride and saying, I don't know what to do, like, help. Because, that's how you learn, is by admitting that you don't know everything.
Cool. Ese, how would you describe the community, having been an alum and also working with different groups now over the last few years?
It is. I would agree with everything that Leo said. It is a very tight-knit community. You're surrounded by people who, can sometimes feel competitive, but it's also very collaborative. I think this Stabile group, it's like a rising tide lifts all boats. So you're sitting next to someone in the class who's had a breakthrough. That inspires me to go home. Even now, teaching, like we talk about something in class and someone's like, oh, I had this experience, or I thought this or did this. And then I go home and I'm up till like 1 or 2 a.m., like looking into that thing, right? Like it's a group where you give and you get. a lot, I feel like. And, in life, they say some people are fountains and some people are drains. And I feel like all the Stabile groups are fountain-like, right? Like everyone is constantly sharing with each other. Leo is actually, I think there's another Sheila, someone I feel like recently was talking about being in a magazine. Their Stabile class also does like a magazine club where they talk about stories too.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
very interesting that everyone's choosing magazines, but cool at the same time, I guess.
It is very cool. And Sheila, I thought I'd just ask since we have, I'm sure, people who are watching this session right now who are in other countries. I know Leo is in Mississippi, is a U.S. Student, but for international students maybe less familiar with techniques in the U.S. and involving investigations, what's it like to be an international student kind of in this community?
Well, we have a number of international students in the school and also, of course, in the Stabile program. I do not, I mean, I think a lot of times the techniques are the same. The public records and the government systems may be different, but generally the techniques, the mindset of investigative reporting translate easily across borders. We do have some sessions where you can look at international databases and we bring international reporters over to speak to the class, but I think that our international student fit seamlessly with the rest of the Stabile community. Um, we encourage people to mainly keep to the US as much as possible because it's very difficult to travel back and forth if you're doing an investigative report. But some of our students have gone overseas for their reporting with quite successful results. But that takes a lot of preparation and a lot of advanced reporting to make sure, because you can't go back during the school year, to make sure you get the story when you're out there in the field. And by the way, the Stabile program pays for travel and other costs related to your master's project. So if you need to rent a car, go on ride a plane, get a hotel room, all of that, the Stabile program supports your reporting.
Great. Another question for Sheila, just about kind of where people end up after they finish this program. I know we've had many, many different graduating classes of Stabile students, but in general, kind of what are some of the trajectories that people go on with this training?
Well, I think there are different trajectories. One is the trajectory that Leo is on, which is local investigative reporting. We all know that local journalism is very challenged these days, but we've also seen the rise of these new nonprofit investigative reporting centers that do a lot of accountability reporting at the local level. So, for example, apart from Leo, we have two other people, as you said, in the Mississippi Center. We have two people in Oklahoma doing accountability reporting there. We have them all. We have in Baltimore, I think,
Texas.
Texas, yeah. So we have them all over the country. So that's kind of a growth area for investigative reporting. To be honest, at the national level, it's much more challenging as big news organizations, including TV, for example, they used to have big investigative reporting teams. They're downsizing, but there's growth at the local level. And then at the national level, there are also these nonprofits that operate nationally, like ProPublica, Reveal, etc. Um, Overseas, there's great demand for investigative reporting. Some of our students work on cross-border investigative reporting projects. Documentaries, there's a demand for them. And actually, even comedy shows are looking for investigative reporters. We've had students
Mhm.
who worked for John Oliver, for example, because they do a lot of research. They do FOIA requests. They do. So some of our students have set up their own investigative reporting centers. So there's Documented, which covers immigration in New York. There's the Sahan Journal, which covers immigrant communities in Minnesota. There's the War Horse, run by a former Marine who was a Stabile, and they do investigations on the military and on veterans. So there's a whole set of many different options. Some of our students end up, like we have one student who's working for Human Rights Watch, doing the same, using the techniques that he learned while in the program for human rights investigations. So there's a whole range of possibilities for investigative reporting. Oh, there's also podcasting, which is the other growth area. One of our students set up her own podcast company after working for Wondery,
Mhm.
and she's making a go of it. And several others are working on podcasts as well.
Mhm.
So there's that too.
Yeah, and as Leo talked about the shoe leather class, that could be a great training ground if you are interested in doing investigations and that kind of audio work too. Great. And so, Leo, you already talked about being at Mississippi today. Can you tell people just a little bit more about what your kind of role is there now and what kind of skills you draw upon from your Columbia training in your work these days?
Yeah, no, of course. I kind of cover a lot of ground, I'm not gonna lie. I cover a lot of criminal justice work. I have collaborated with the senior investigative reporter on staff on some stories. We did a story on prison deaths. In like a 10-year period, there were 42 prison deaths that were reported, and only 6 of them were actually prosecuted. And we looked into one prison death in Parchman, which is a notorious prison in the Mississippi Delta that has a notorious history. And we looked into how one of the murders happened. I was able to track down actually the deputy warden at the time, who now works at a juvenile detention center in the Delta, and talk to him about what actually took place, get the records. Found the guard who, in our report we talk about a guard who flipped the lights off, handed the keys to an inmate. The inmate checked themselves out of the cell and into another cell and committed the murder. Again, the murder was not prosecuted. But that's just one example of something I've done. I've also put out a story today about a charter school that is opening up in a county that has very little broadband, and has no money, and is asking for more money. So it really runs the gambit of stuff I cover. Prison deaths, looked into a county jail as part of a very large investigative team that looked into abuses in a county jail in Mississippi. I'm just now kind of getting into juvenile justice. So I've been looking at juvenile detention centers, investigating, violence and incidents and suicide attempts. So really a lot of different accountability type stories. And again, these are longer term projects. The other day I got a bill from a public records request for over $3,000. And I had to, using skills I learned in this class, say why, and what is the hourly rate, how many pages are we talking, and then they came back and said 1,500, and I'm going back and forth because that's just part of the job. But I know that I kind of went on a little bit, but it's a lot of different stories, criminal justice, education. I cover a region, the Delta mostly, which is very underreported on. So mostly rural, unfortunately high crime area with a lot of poverty, with education systems that have been failing for some time. So a lot of what I do is go through records, interview locals. It helps to have been a teacher there for a couple of years. I know a lot of people already, but yeah, I cover a lot of ground and continue to kind of collaborate across the newsroom. My newsroom, Mississippi Today, is part of a consortium of newsrooms. We have a new one in Lafayette, Louisiana, and one in New Orleans. So we sometimes, every now and then, we'll collaborate across the 3 different newsrooms. It's part of a consortium called Deep South Today, and they just hired someone from the Garrison Project to kind of help with that. So yeah, on any given day, I'm working on a lot of different types of stories. Luckily, I work in a newsroom where it isn't quick turnaround stories, so I'm able to really work on more investigative work that holds the powerful to account and digs into issues that are in the public interest.
Cool, thanks, Leo. So I know we're kind of running to about 10 minutes left. So if people have any questions for our panelists about the program, you can put them in the chat and just direct them to me, Ross, the host. And if they're about the Stabile program, I'll see if we can ask a few of those. But as people might be typing, I thought I'd ask Sheila and Ese, just, as we talked about earlier, the MS general program has investigative training in it. So as people watching this now or who maybe watch the video later are thinking whether the investigative specialization is the right fit for them, what should they think about in terms of how much they really want to get into investigations in terms of how to gauge whether this is the right fit or the broader program potentially?
Yeah, so the investigative program, you have less flexibility compared to the general MS program because you have to take the investigative, for the whole year, you have to take a Stabile investigative techniques and then a Stabile seminar. And you have to take in the spring an investigative seminar and production class. So your choices are limited. If you want more flexibility, you can opt for the general MS program where you can still do a 7-week investigative techniques class and opt to enroll in one of the investigative seminar and production classes. But in Stabile, it's a very concentrated and constant, it's the whole year you're thinking, doing investigative reporting. So if you're really interested in exposing wrongdoing, finding evidence of wrongdoing, holding individuals and institutions, the powerful, accountable for what they do, then investigative reporting is for you. It's long term. You need to be patient. You need to be persistent. You need to be able to overcome obstacles. It's not a quick turnaround. If you want more daily reporting, quick turnaround stories or more feature stories or more narrative stories, then I suggest you opt for the general MS program. But really, we are about investigating wrongdoing and looking at the harm the wrongdoing does and saying these people are responsible or these institutions are responsible, these policies are responsible, and they should be held to account. So there's that. If that's the type of work you want to do, then you should enroll in the Stabile program. If you want to have more flexibility and want to do more narrative or feature or news reporting or more, say, documentary type or audio type, focusing more on certain kinds of media or platforms, then the general MS program is for you.
Mm-hmm. Ese, any thoughts about that as well?
I don't have more to add.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. So yeah, the great advice, Sheila. And then a couple questions I see in the chat. These are, key questions. What, Sheila and Ese, might you say people, who are evaluating applications for this program, what do you look for in a strong candidate for this program? And there are some people who say that maybe they don't have as much of a background yet in reporting or in investigative work. In those cases too, what would you look for in an application that might be strong for this specialized program?
So you don't need to have journalism experience to be in the MS program, and you don't need to have investigative experience or investigative journalism experience. But we've found that the ones who succeed best in the program are those who have a patience for looking at, say, documents, lots of documents, following the document trail, have patience looking at data, have the persistence, in going deep, and not giving up when there are obstacles to getting information. Also, people who are able to interview sources and able to, especially sources who are in difficult situations, and able to get information from them, convince them to tell their stories or to help them get documents or data. So what we're looking for really is the ability to dig deep. And so, for example, people who have had experience doing that would be lawyers, or people who have had journalism experience already, or we've had law enforcement types also. But you don't need to have that background. But if you're not satisfied with what's superficial, with what people tell you, but you want to know, go deeper and deeper. So investigative reporting aims for depth rather than breadth. People, you can do, explanatory stories that explain certain phenomenon or certain events. But that's fine. That's journalism that's much needed, especially at this time. But there's also reporting that goes deep into something narrower and tries to figure out what went wrong here and what is wrong about the system that makes individuals or institutions or policies fail. We're looking at how systems fail in investigative reporting. If you're interested in doing that, then show that in your application. Anything that you've looked at, whether as a student or in other profession, where you've examined systems, where you've shown persistence, you've shown the ability to dig deeper beyond the surface of things, that would really help in your application. Yeah.
Great advice.
I'd
Great.
agree if I could add a little bit that curiosity and persistence are really key. And just one extra thing, even if, and Sheila mentioned some of this, but even if your background isn't explicitly in reporting, like there's someone in the class now who investigated algorithms and technology before coming to the Stabile program. And in her application essay, she said she wanted to investigate the black boxes in society, right? Like, how does what you do now fit with what you want to do, right? Like I think being curious and also patient, persistent, relentless about getting to the bottom of things will serve you well in the program.
Great. Leo, do you remember? I know it's been a couple of years since you did your app, but you remember how you kind of approached applying things you kind of wanted to highlight back then?
Yeah, no, I spoke kind of, I think specifically about my experience in Mississippi as a teacher, encountering the criminal justice system through the lens of my students and about the impact that Anna Wolf's reporting on the welfare scandal had on the communities I lived in. And weirdly enough, I literally, my desk is right next to hers right now, which is kind of crazy to think about. She won the Pulitzer in 2023 for her investigation into welfare fraud in Mississippi, and it became a huge national story. But yeah, my application was about investigative journalists I admired, why I admired them, and about issues that I was interested in looking into. I think I might have mentioned the funeral or something to do with criminal justice of youths, something to do with that. I spoke, I think, pretty clearly about why I felt I was you know why I was curious about these issues and how I intended to go about looking into them. I think that was one of the questions was, come up with a plan or something. Again, it was a while back, but I think that was one of the questions. And even writing the application, I was just really, I was really motivated to put down into writing, what I was interested in. I was really, fascinated by that. That's a joke because there's a lecture in the Stabile program where one of the co-professors talks about how important it is to let sources know how interested you are in what they do. And I find that still to be true. A lot of people talk about how difficult it is to get difficult sources to open up, but if you express deep interest in what they do, and really consider things from their perspective, you could find a way of voicing a way to get them to kind of open up to you and share information that you need. So, yeah, I think in my application, I wrote a lot about what interested me, about what I wanted to look into.
Great, thanks, Leo. And I see we're running up to the end of the hour. I saw a couple questions I can answer real quick. And I also put a link in the chat where you can join some upcoming admission sessions to answer some of these questions in more detail. One was whether you could do the data journalism program and the Stabile program together. The answer would be no, but we did recommend that you come to our data journalism webinar, which is actually tomorrow, and hear more about that and see what that curriculum looks like. And then you can always reach out to our office if you're curious about kind of what you think would be the right direction for you between those opportunities. And another person asked about financial aid, and yes, there will be several webinars coming up about scholarship process. So people applying to the Stabile program, as well as our other MS and MA programs, there will have a separate scholarship application that will open very soon, and we'll have more information about that coming up. But anyone who applies for scholarship to any of these programs could be eligible for potential scholarship funding to help afford their education here. So stay tuned for more information on that in the coming weeks as well. But thank you so much, Professor Sheila Coronel, Professor Ese Olumhense, and Leo for your great insights into this program. It's a great conversation. And we recommend anyone who's watching this to definitely reach out if you have questions to our team at apply.journalism@columbia.edu if you need any more information or want to just get more details about specific things we discussed today. And thank you again for tuning in wherever you are in the world. And we hope to see you at some more sessions, maybe tomorrow, but also in the coming weeks and months too. Thank you again. Have a great rest of your day and take care. Bye, everybody.